Hello, I can't see anything. I guess I should start talking. I'm a bit confused here. Hello, I don't know if the people are following me. I don't know whether I should be seeing some questions. But here I am. We're talking about how to maintain, positive engagement with language learning. Um, and so I think this is a key aspect of language learning that people perhaps underestimate. In order to be successful, you have to stay with it. That's basically it. Language learning is it's a bit like a jog through the park. It's not a sprint, and we don't constantly have to be questioning ourselves. How fast am I going? Am I learning it fast enough? We just have to enjoy the scenery, so to speak. And so this is easier said than done because very often we are discouraged because we're confronted with you know, results that are less than what we expected. We're forgetting things. We feel that we should be able to, retrieve words more easily. We're watching a movie we don't understand. We're with friends and we're not participating in the conversation. And so, how do we maintain our, engagement? And I think there are a couple of things. I've mentioned them. Those of you who follow my videos, you'll know that mindset is very important. And there was this flow theory that where we feel the greatest sense of satisfaction, some kind of a permanent dopamine kick, is when we're struggling with something that is difficult, yet within our grasp. So we realize that it's within our grasp, but it's not easy. It's difficult. And when we achieve some results, then we have a great sense of satisfaction. And I was thinking about this the other day. So I say I have 20 languages that I can speak to varying degrees. But when I am speaking, say, French or Japanese or Spanish languages that I speak relatively well, I don't get the same sense of satisfaction or achievement as when I say am able to carry on a conversation in Farsi, or the other day I had a conversation in Arabic, or when I listen to something in one of my weaker languages, or for that matter, when I go back to what was a weak language that I developed for a visit to the country, and then it lapsed. But if I revive that language, again, I get a sense of satisfaction. So part of the satisfaction of language learning has to be that sense that you're doing something a little bit extraordinary. You're getting outside of your native language, native culture. You're able to access people of a different language and culture, but it isn't easy. Easy is staying in your own language and culture. So if you want to be totally at ease, comfortable, not worrying about how you pronounce, not worrying about mistakes, completely unself-consciously communicating, that's your native language. It'll never be that way in another language. But trying to get that other language up to a level where it is as good as possible, my own reaction always is that whatever I'm able to achieve, I say, wow, look at me. So, that's, I would love to have questions from people because, as you may know from watching my videos, I can ramble on this subject for a long time. But I would be interested in hearing from people. Uh, or would you rather have me continue to ramble on, or do you have specific questions about some of the frustrations or obstacles or positive, senses of achievement that you achieve in language learning, which keep you going? And there's no question that we do need to have the occasional victory, even though it's hard and we are sometimes disappointed, maybe because we have unrealistic expectations. But we also need to have a victory. So when I'm feeling down, say about my Arabic, and I had a good session in Arabic the other day, that makes me feel more positive. Uh, I saw a tweet in some language and I was able to read it. So we need these little victories, but they aren't always there, and so we have to keep going. We have to keep going. Another thing that I think is important is to recognize that you may not be tremendously motivated, but as they say in French, l'appétit vient en mangeant. And as you engage with the language, for a while, that engagement will enable you to discover new things that keep you going. But there are times when you're not so motivated, and then there are a number of techniques that we can use. So I'll ramble a little further here. One of them is variety. And I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about sort of the lifestyle that leads to greater longevity, living long, right? And apparently, people who have a varied exercise routine, in other words, they do some running, they maybe play tennis, they lift weights, they go for a walk, they go for a run. The more you vary your exercise routine, because they tracked like 100,000 people over, I don't know, 30 years, people who had a varied exercise or level of activity, they tended to live the longest. Now, we don't know. Maybe people with a varied exercise routine also have better eating habits. So there could be any number of reasons why that group did well. But the thing that stuck in my mind was variety. And so, at Link, for example, you can review your words, or you have an Anki deck, or you're going to talk to a tutor, or you're going to listen, or you're going to read, and you can vary the type of content that you have. Easy, repetitive material like mini stories, or more challenging material. So variety, I think, is important, and also not being too hard on yourself. So I'm just wondering if I'm missing where there might be some um, questions or comments, but I don't see any, so I will just continue. If you do have some questions, I gather they're supposed to show up somewhere here, but I don't see any. Let's see here, just a second here. No, I don't see any. So, okay, Tanya, maybe you could drop me a note if I'm supposed to find my comments somewhere. Manage. No, I don't see any comments, any questions. Okay. Okay, I have one here. I'm a native Hindi speaker, fluent in English and intermediate in Korean. Where did I last? Okay. Mandarin and Thai too, but I was afraid it would mix the tones up. Any advice? Okay. So this is the question again. I'll move. Wait a second. Move this over here. About doing more than one language at once. So most of my language learning experience has been with one language at a time. Particularly where I had a specific a goal, like I'm going to visit Turkey, or I'm going to go to the Czech Republic. And then I focus on one language. And you are more efficient if you focus on one language. Absolutely. However, the last few years, I decided to do three languages at once, more or less at once, sort of alternating Arabic, Turkish, and Persian. And because I was interested in the region, and it was kind of fun to explore three different languages. And when you get tired of one, you've moved to the next, and it kind of refreshes you a little bit. But it is less efficient. There's no question that it's less efficient. As to Mandarin and Thai tones, whether that would confuse you, I have no idea. Again, I wouldn't do that. Like, if you consider Cantonese and Mandarin, I have to completely separate the Mandarin and the Cantonese tones, because there's a tremendous, and especially because many of the words in Cantonese and Mandarin are the same. So there's a great tendency to be confused and use, say, a Mandarin tone on your Cantonese. In the case of Thai and Mandarin, I don't know Thai, so I can't say, but at least, I would keep them separate. That's my advice. Number two question here. Staying with it is the hardest thing. I literally can't strike a balance between either working very hard or slacking off on my Japanese studies. Yeah, I think that's pretty common. And, when I have a particular goal, like about to go to Turkey, then within Link, I set myself a streak and goals every day, so many coins, and I'm driven by that numerical. I often talk about the mechanical rabbit at the dog races. It's something sort of extrinsic outside of me that makes me want to continue doing it, because I want to maintain my streak, because I know that I want to increase my known word total, because then when I get to Turkey, hopefully I'll be able to communicate. But if you don't have that kind of an immediate goal, it is difficult. And therefore, for me, like in my Persian, if I find a podcast about a subject of interest to me, it might be evolution, which is of great interest to me, or it might be something from Iranian history or something like that. Uh, then I'm looking forward to the next episode, because I'm not conscious of learning the language, because I'm doing things that are of interest to me. When we're at an early stage, we are necessarily involved with stuff that is less intrinsically interesting. And so like the mini stories, for example. So you have to kind of stay with that. You got to repeat, you got to go over again and again, sort of basic stuff. Or if you do take on a more difficult content item, then you struggle through it and there's lots of unknown words and you still don't understand. And in those situations, it is difficult to keep yourself motivated. You have to say it's worth it. And don't push yourself too hard. Kind of, if you put in a half hour reading or listening, just accept the fact that you are improving. I used the example in a recent video. So when you reach my age, balance becomes an issue. So there are these exercises for improving your balance. For example, standing on one foot. Apparently, this strengthens your ankles. But when I'm doing that, I have no sense that my ankles are getting stronger. But I believe that my ankles are getting stronger, and I notice that my balance improves. So there are a number of activities like that. So if you stay with your language, whatever you put in, you are benefiting. It's not like going to the gym. When you go to the gym for half an hour, you come away feeling a little tighter. You have a stronger sense that you did something physically, tightened up the muscles, got more physically fit. When we spend another, say, a half hour with our language, listening or reading or reviewing, we don't have that same confidence that we have actually achieved anything. It's more like me standing on one foot, trying to strengthen my ankles. It's actually doing that because apparently it's not only the ankles that are strengthening, it's all the muscles sending messages to different parts of the body, including your core, instructing you how to improve your basic balance functions. So it is doing those things, even though I'm not aware of it. So I think you just have to accept that and stay with it. Question number 3. Have you ever looked at studying Hindi? Yes, I've looked at it. In fact, we have several Indian languages at Link. We have Hindi, we have Punjabi, we have Gujarati, we have Urdu. The thing is that taking on a new language, particularly something like that, it's a major challenge. Major challenge. In the case with Urdu, at least I would have the Arabic writing system. If I did Punjabi and Hindi, I have to learn the new writing system. So until I am ready to devote myself to that for like years, a couple of years, then I shouldn't take it on. So therefore, I'm focused right now on improving my existing languages, in particular right now, Arabic. So for the time being, I'm not doing any Hindi. Question number 4. I'm struggling to activate what I know. Yeah, activation. Activation, in other words, turning your passive knowledge into active capability in the language, is obviously a challenge. It does happen to some extent. There are 2 things that govern it, in my opinion. One is how much input you have already acquired. In other words, your level of comprehension, your vocabulary level, the ability of the brain to start anticipating the language, all of these things. However, at some point you have to use it. And when the opportunity and the need to use the language is there, you will gradually improve. It may not be as good as you would like, because we may have a lot of things in our memory which we can't retrieve. And gradually we're able to retrieve better. In my experience, it's not just from using the language, speaking, because very often if we're not where the language is spoken, that opportunity might be limited. It's also by continuing your input activities. So you're continuing, much like artificial intelligence, you're pumping more and more information into the brain, and the brain becomes better at anticipating. And when we say something, we are drawing on our basically memory reserve, our ability to plan, our ability to anticipate. That is what enables us to produce an utterance. So certainly make yourself, try to put yourself in a situation where you can use the language, but continue your input activities. And this is going to therefore be determined by, what opportunities there are. And also, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, it takes a while. And so you have to be willing to make the mistakes, struggle, make mistakes, and the brain learns from mistakes. So just keep going. You're struggling to activate what you know. Good. That's good. Keep struggling is my answer. Question 5. I'm hitting the intermediate plateau in Korean too. It is sometimes demotivating. What's weird is that some days I feel like I understand a lot of Korean, and other days it's the opposite. Of course. And I think you just have to continue. It's like what I said earlier. You have to believe that what you are doing is in effect is beneficial. And it just requires more and more. That's the sad thing. And of course, don't forget, the intermediate plateau is an intermediate plateau because in the early stages, we know nothing about Korean, let's say, the language you're learning. And we learn a lot, and we learn a lot of high frequency words and expressions. And we have the sense of having achieved something. Once you realize that frequency declines very, very quickly, and so very soon you are chasing off what seems an endless number of relatively low frequency words. So that being the case, yes, you're in a plateau. And that's where, if you can find yourself an interesting podcast in Korean, something on a subject of interest to you, if you can import that into Link or some other way, get at it. If you like the tone, the voice of the people speaking, if you're interested in the subject, you listen to it. You can listen to it more than once. You can look up the words, not expecting to nail anything down, but at least if it's an interesting subject and if the voice is pleasing, you will stay engaged. So you still won't have the sense of making any dramatic progress. But if some days you feel you understand a lot and other days you understand less, that's a good sign. And over time, the amount you understand will increase. And over time, the amount you can say will increase. So you're on the right track. Question 6. Started learning Japanese over a month ago. Your videos have been really helpful. I do have a question though. Do you find it more beneficial to immerse after learning new words and refreshing the old ones in Anki, Link, or does it not matter what time you immerse as long as you do it? So my sort of approach always is in language learning to do what I want to do. So if I want to listen more, I listen more. If I have an opportunity to use the language, I will always use it. If I'm learning a language, Persian, and it isn't very good, if I come across a Persian speaker, I'm going to try to say whatever I have. But I won't necessarily line up a lot of tutoring sessions. Once or twice a week is plenty. And so my major activity is always input, listening and reading. In terms of Anki, I don't do Anki, but I will, if I'm in a difficult content item on Link, I will go into sentence mode and I will review each sentence and then review the words that are in that sentence. The best time to me to review vocabulary is immediately after having come across the vocabulary in a text. Once you go to a list somewhere, even an Anki deck or a list that's now days and weeks removed from when you came across that word, I don't think you're achieving much in reviewing it. I think it's when you came across that word in a specific context and you review it once again, and maybe you go back in and read the context, you're starting to create some neural connections. So the reviewing, so I don't know what you mean by what time you immerse, but the reviewing activity should come as close as possible to when you come across these words. And also the content that it came from should be as small as possible. So that's why I like going into sentence mode. There's 3 words there that are new to me. I review them in matching pairs. Maybe I try to reconstitute the sentence in Link. Then I go back and read it again. And later on, I may read the whole text that sentence was extracted from. But close to where you found it, small sample of content where the connection of that word to other words is still alive. So that would be my answer here. Question number 7. I've been studying Japanese for a few months. I'm comfortable with hiragana and katakana. And the next one on the list will be the kanji. What approach would you suggest to get into them? Okay, first of all, being comfortable with hiragana and katakana after a few months doesn't mean that your brain automatically processes them into meaning the way your native, presumably Latin alphabet does. So continuing to read hiragana and katakana is important. Insofar as the kanji, the Chinese characters, is concerned, what I did, I often go back to this, what I did is I wrote them out by hand. And so I would do 10 at a time. I would write them out by hand. This was off flashcards, actual paper flashcards. And then I would write them out 10 times. Then I'd pick up the next one, write it out 10 times. And after a while, I come back to the first one. And so it's sort of like a mini spaced repetition system where I'm writing characters out by hand. Eventually, I got it up to 30 a day. I was a full-time language student, recognizing that I would continue to forget. But I think the fact of writing them out by hand helped. On the other hand, my son, Mark, decided to learn the characters for Japanese, and he went to a system called Heisig, which is some kind of a mnemonic system. So you might want to look that up. Furthermore, there are now so many more computer systems that help people learn characters. But the basic principle is you start off with 10 a day, take it up to 30 a day, recognize that you will forget at least half of what you learn and have to relearn many, many times. And as soon as possible, start finding these characters in a context. And so they gradually start to become a part of you, just like the hiragana and katakana will increasingly become natural to you. So main thing is keep reading and listening, connecting what you see with what you hear. Question 9. Hello, sir. I'm from India, and I find it hard to understand singular and plural forms in Russian. Okay. Please give any suggestions for improving in learning pattern. I'm using Duolingo. Well, I mean, singular and plural is the least of your problems in Russian because there are so many endings for nouns and adjectives for different cases and for singular and plural. I think, continue listening and reading to content of interest. That's the problem with Duolingo. It's basically snippets of the language. It's not sort of meaningful content. And when you come across a form of an adjective or a noun, you can look it up in the table to remind yourself of what it is, but don't expect to remember it because you won't. So it's this constant flipping back and forth between looking at a table to confirm what form of the, verb or noun it is, and then continuing with your input activities. And over time, the brain will get used to it. But it takes a while. Okay, question 10. I am at B1 in French. I would like to hear your thoughts about how to be comfortable in conversation. I have a private tutor 6 hours a week and a raft of French exercise books. Okay. To me, B1, now, so we have the European framework of reference for language proficiency or whatever it is. A1, A2 is 2 levels of intermediate. B1, B2 is 2 levels, A1, A2 is 2 levels of beginner. B1, B2 is intermediate. C1, C2 is advanced. At B1, you aren't able to speak very well. To me, proficiency implying that you can comfortably maintain a conversation means B2 to me. However, when you're at B1, you want to be speaking because that's going to improve your ability to speak. Again, I would do a lot of listening, more so than exercise books. Find B1, you can start accessing interesting content. French, because of all the liaison, is difficult to understand, more difficult than some other languages because it seems to all flow together. And so again, I might sound like a broken record. It all comes back to this idea of exposing yourself to enough of the language that things start to become natural. 6 hours a week, like if I had a tutor for 6 hours a week, all I would do would speak. It would be to speak. Uh, you will eventually self-correct most of the things that you are saying wrong. You don't need a tutor to correct you. Also, if I have any doubts about anything in French grammar, conjugation table or whatever, I can quickly look it up. So that I can even ask Chat GPT to give me 10 example sentences of any aspect of French grammar. So mainly it's an opportunity to speak. And then when you're away from your tutor, you do have to do a lot of listening and reading to build up your, large language model in your brain that's going to enable you to speak. I don't do exercise books, so I get no comment. I don't find them useful. Question 11. Do you consider Swedish to be your native language in a sense as it was the first language you ever spoke? How many languages did your parents speak? Okay. So again, this is this interesting question of what is a native language. So in my case, my parents were from Czechoslovakia. They spoke with each other. They spoke mostly German and occasionally Czech. And we all moved to Sweden. No, not me, but my parents moved to Sweden in 1945. Got out of Czechoslovakia. Sorry, no. I was born in 45. My parents moved there in 1939. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been born. The first, and they spoke with my brother and me in Swedish. So soon after I was born, the language I was speaking was Swedish. And for the first 5 years of my life, I spoke Swedish. So at that point, that was my native language. Then in 1951, my family moved to Canada. We moved to Montreal, English-speaking part of Montreal. Montreal in those days was 2 million French speakers, 1 million English speakers. If you lived with the English speakers, you were at school and with friends and totally in an English-speaking environment. My parents said, we are now in Canada. We're going to speak English. Although after we had French in school, they did try to speak some French at home. They were, spoke 4 or 5 languages, German, Czech, English, French at least. But very soon I forgot all my Swedish. And I have no recollection of transitioning from Swedish to English. I was with friends, kids in the neighborhood. I didn't think I spoke funny English. I probably did. But pretty soon I was just speaking English and I'd forgotten my Swedish. So today, the question is, what's my native language? I prefer to say, what is my first language? So for me, my first language is English, the language that I think in, the language that is most comfortable for me, the language where I have the largest vocabulary, the best comprehension is English. So question 12, what is the key to maintaining work discipline and consistency? Is there a secret to being disciplined and hardworking? Well, they talk about, so it's a matter of motivation, right? And so we always hear intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. The intrinsic motivation comes from within you. It's, you want to do it. You like the language. You can visualize yourself speaking the language. That's a positive thing for you. You anticipate being able to speak the language, gets you excited. Then you have extrinsic motivation. That's, for example, our statistics at Link, which nudge you. And the extrinsic can be quite powerful. And I used the example of before going to Turkey, I said, I've got to increase my known words total from whatever it was, 10,000 to 25,000. And so that very definitely motivated me. And every day I had to, do so much. My coins, every day I had to achieve my goal. So some of these things, these extrinsic things, nudging you forward, can provide a level of discipline. But ultimately, if you are relying on discipline and being hardworking, you won't make it. So you have to find a way to enjoy the process. You have to find a way to reduce frustration reduce any sense of disappointment, and maximize your sense of pleasure and achievement. So this can be by giving yourself credit for what you're doing. It can be by finding content of interest to you. So even if you miss the odd word, the content is so interesting that you're continuing to expose yourself to the language. And so I think rely more on motivation rather than on discipline. Okay, next. When I listen to Russian, even slow Russian, I recognize many words and I know that I know them, but have difficulty in processing them in real time. Is the solution simply to listen to more? Yes, of course, the solution is to listen to more and also to listen and read. I find that when I listen, that has the effect of triggering curiosity. And curiosity is very powerful in learning anything. If you are curious about Russia or Russian literature or history or whatever, or in my case, I'm curious about, let's say right now, Arabic or the history of the Levant. And so curiosity is powerful. The more curious you are, the better you learn. Apparently, the way the brain works, and I can't remember all this hippocampus and all this stuff, but if you are curious about some item A, you will learn it better, but you will also learn other things better while you're in that period of being curious. So when I listen to something, my sort of order usually is listen, didn't understand, very curious, I go and read it, I look up words. Having had my curiosity triggered by listening and not understanding, I'm now very motivated to learn the words that I didn't understand. And so, if you're listening to Russian, or maybe you're working around the house and you're listening to even Russian spoken at a normal speed, and you're picking up words and expressions here and there, which is a good thing, by the way. That's all pounding more stuff into your brain. But then you say, geez, I almost understood it, didn't fully understand it. Then you go and you read it. And if you're on link, you look up the words. That doesn't mean that when you next listen to it, you're going to understand it all. Let's be clear about that. But it's just that constant process of layering words that you hear, that you read, and just it's these neurons that are wired together or fire together, wire together. You just got to keep doing it. But the listening, it's perfectly normal that you kind of picked out words and phrases here and there. You kind of understood it, but not really. Now you've got that white heat of curiosity. Now you should go and read and look up the words. So how do you deal when the language in books that interest you is too hard, but children content is too boring? Very interesting question. So first of all, children content is not easy. Okay, that's been my experience in a variety of languages, starting with Le Petit Prince, which is available in many, many languages. Children's books contain a lot of very low frequency vocabulary: the crow, the pig, the donkey, whatever. So content that's too hard. I have that right now in Turkish, for example. I have books that I bought, handheld books. I can't read them. There's just too many words that I don't know. So what can I do? I can get the audiobook. Unfortunately, it's very hard to find audiobook and matching ebook. Very often the sites that sell you ebooks and audiobooks don't offer that. Where they do, as has been the case for me in Polish and in Danish and in Swedish, then of course I import both. Well, I just rely on the audio wherever I have it on some app, and then I import the ebook into Link and I look up the words. This is a key question because we need interesting content. That's what keeps us going. And yet the system, I look forward to the day when literally any book you want to access in language X is going to be available in audio and digital format. I can bring them into Link, I can look up the words, and I can work my way through them. We are not there yet. So, however, when I get to a level, let's say Polish, which my Polish is not very good, but I can struggle through a book now, largely because it's written in the Latin alphabet. And so when I left Poland, I read a book on the way home on the plane. And there's lots of words I didn't know, and I have the audiobook. And so it's not ideal, but I'm able to struggle, through that. So uh, whatever, I don't know which language the questioner here is referring to, but if you can find audio, if you can find the digital version, then you can start looking up the words. Uh, and the main goal is to get through the book. So the main goal is not to learn every word that's in that book. The main goal is to plow your way through the book, which, as you say, is a book of interest. Question 15. How many, where are we? Whoops. How many languages can you practice each day? Do you think it's possible to work on a routine 3 or 4 languages same day? How many languages can you work on Link each day? Do you have a routine of working 3 or 4 languages? Okay. Simple answer is no. Even when I'm doing 3 languages at the same time, like Persian, Arabic, and Turkish, I will focus on one. Right now, I am doing Arabic. Now, if something comes along in standard Arabic as opposed to Levantine Arabic, I can do them both at the same time. Not a problem, although my focus is Levantine Arabic. I think it's very hard to practice 3 or 4 languages. How much time do you have? If I've got an hour and a half a day, that's maximum. So no, one language at a time. And if I'm doing more than one language at a time, that means I'm on one for 3 months and another for 3 months. That's not to say I might not listen to the odd thing, say in Persian now, because I'm in my car and it comes up as a podcast. But essentially, focus on one for at least 3 months. Question 16. If you were not learning a language to survive in another country, what deep human need does it serve? It varies by person. What do you see? All right. So, languages that I needed to survive in another country, English and French, period, and Japanese. But even there, it didn't need it to survive because most foreigners in Japan then and probably today survive in English. So that was never the goal. To me, I find learning languages exciting. It is exciting because, however many 6,000 languages there are in the world, but major languages, there's like whatever, a few dozen. All of them are connected to history, cultures, civilizations, human beings living in different places at different times. And the ability to connect with that through language, I find fascinating, rewarding. And when I'm able to do that, I get a strong sense of achievement. That's it. It's not to survive. Now, if I'm in Vancouver and I'm in a grocery store and there's someone there speaking Farsi, Persian, and I'm able to engage with them in Persian or Korean or Chinese, I get a slight kick out of that. But that's not the major goal. The major goal is to connect, to have a better understanding of these languages, cultures, countries, civilizations. That's the goal. So some people are more interested in, collecting butterflies. It depends what your motives, what your interests are. Okay, how do you practice speaking alone at home? I don't. I never do, never have done. When I get an opportunity to speak, you need to get more in you. So am I going to spend half an hour speaking with whatever limited number of words I can retrieve without having a genuine conversation with someone, which is stimulating me to, search for other words? No, I will just continue listening and reading. So I don't practice speaking alone at home. One thing that can be quite useful at Link, where we have that sort of sentence view, at the end of that review series of activities, you are invited to pronounce the sentence. And then you're told you got it 85%, 90% correct. And so that is a way where you are in what is a meaningful context forced to say something in the language. I find that's quite helpful. But other than that, I don't do any speaking alone at home. Do you think that people in the past were more multilingual than now? Well, it depends where. There have been places in the world, there are today, or times in history where people were more multilingual. So I happen to have read the history of Hannibal, Carthaginian general who fought with the Romans. And he spoke some form of Phoenician or Carthaginian. He spoke Greek, Latin, and then perhaps because he was in Spain for quite a while, maybe he spoke some of the original languages there. I don't know. So there are places, certainly, the Middle East at the time of, say, the birth of Christ. We know that the apostles wrote in Greek, that the common language is Aramaic. The Romans, probably some people spoke Latin. So yeah, there are times and places where people were more multilingual. Mostly, I don't think most people were illiterate. Most people never wandered very far from their village, probably only spoke one language. I don't know the answer to that question. But obviously, today, places like Singapore are very multilingual. I understand that in Ethiopia, there are a lot of languages. So, depending on circumstances, at a certain time and a certain place, some people are more multilingual than, say, if you live in the middle of a big country where everyone speaks the same language, like the United States. How do you personally gauge when you are ready to start to speak? What do you make sure you're able to do before speaking? First, understand others, then come. Okay, so any speaking that I'm going to do in a language that I'm learning is likely to be with a tutor. So I usually say I would like to have my sort of passive vocabulary at link between 3 to 5,000 words. If I don't have 3 to 5,000 words, I'm unlikely to be able to say much. I'm unlikely to understand much of what the other person is saying. And therefore, any conversation is going to be very unsatisfactory. And part of it is you want to expand your vocabulary. And when you have very little vocabulary, you can't even trigger much vocabulary on the part of the other person because you don't understand what they're saying. So to me, basically, when I get to 3 to 5,000 words, depending on the language, then I start to engage with a tutor. But I always believe, yes, comprehension is very important. I've had the experience that I have a few phrases. I go to a country like Vietnam, I say my few phrases. I have no idea what people are saying back at me. So comprehension, yes, and a minimum level of vocabulary. And next here, when learning Spanish, is it better to start with a specific accent region or to get content from all Spanish-speaking countries from the get-go? So this applies not only to Spanish, but to a number of languages: English, French, Portuguese, and I could go on, where there are, varying types of pronunciation. In fact, in all languages, there are variations within the country, and if the language is spoken in more than one country, you're going to have variations. Because I'm focused on input, therefore on acquiring vocabulary, it doesn't matter to me. And I would imagine that a large number of learners, until they become at least sort of intermediate, can't tell if the person is speaking this variation or that, which Spanish is it? Is it Mexican? Is it Peruvian? Is it even Spanish? There's minor indications. Okay, in Spain they have the th, the theta. It's hard. The initial goal is to acquire vocabulary, and so therefore use them all. I listen to Portuguese from Portugal and Portuguese from Brazil, which are actually more different, at least in pronunciation, than different areas of the Spanish-speaking world. But the goal is to develop a wide vocabulary. And also, because Spanish speakers can come from a variety of different countries, you should listen to, in my view, people from different countries so that you're comfortable. If you're learning English, you have to be able to understand a Scotsman, an Australian, someone from New York. So, yeah, I would, it doesn't matter. Later on, in getting back to the question about Spanish, if you're going to work in Argentina, or you're going to work in Spain, or you're going to work in Mexico, or you have a friend or relative or some other specific reason why you want to focus on that regional variation of Spanish, then of course you start focusing in more on that. But initially, I think you just take content that interests you and go for it. Question 21. A famous YouTuber for Chinese learning said, start with mastering tones. But after listening to that, my Mandarin study got stuck. Okay. First of all, you're not going to master tones. And certainly you're not going to master tones at the beginning. You have to listen to so much of the language. and develop some natural habits in the language. Habits that may initially be wrong. You may get the tones wrong, but in time, they will gradually improve. If you are focused on when you when you see a new vocabulary item, if it says this is a second tone, it's got a little either an accent mark or a 2 or a 3, pay that a little bit of attention, but forget it. You cannot, while speaking, try to remember not only the meaning of the word, but what the tone of that word is. You have to be exposed to so much of the language that some of these tones start to come out naturally. And in time, more and more of them come out naturally. And I've always been against the idea of trying to master anything at the beginning. You can't master the grammar, you can't master the tone. You can only expose yourself to the language and go back in later and try to touch things up a little bit. But the major goal is to get in there and acquire, expose yourself as much as possible. And some of those tones in certain expressions will start to seem natural. It's the same with the case endings in Russian. Some of these things will start to seem more natural to you as the brain starts to anticipate the tone, anticipate what the structure should be. But no, I'm totally against the idea that you can master anything. Okay, next question, and maybe we'll end it here. If you had to start learning a new language today, what would you do differently? Very interesting question and a good one to end up on. And I should say, by the way, if there's interest, I'm happy to do these once a month. I did a video on 5 things that I wish I knew before when I started learning languages. The first one is, and I think the biggest thing is, don't let the sort of sense of the difficulty of the grammar or the tones in Chinese or any of these obstacles, don't let that discourage you. In other words, I didn't know then that if I exposed myself to enough of the language and if I kept going, that the brain was actually going to get used to the language. And that my goal was to enjoy it and to keep going and not to allow any of these, and therefore to do things that I like doing. And also that the onus is on me to find these things that are enjoyable and interesting to me. So I have to take ownership. Don't scare me with the subjunctive or other things, the tones. So I think when I first started, I didn't put enough. I thought I had to learn, the rules, the 16 verbs in French that take être as an auxiliary verb, or any of these things. Whereas actually, I need to find things that I find enjoyable, pleasant to listen to, pleasant to read. Now, and the other thing I didn't realize then, which I now realize, is in the initial 3-6 months, repetition is tremendously important. So typically, again, a typical textbook, it moves too quickly from one scenario to another, whereas really what you need is a lot of repetition. And I've mentioned this before, when I look at the statistics on Link, I've listened to some of these items, the mini stories in particular, because that's where I start, 30, 40 times, not at one sitting, but I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so tremendous amount of repetition is needed in the early stages in order to give you some traction in the language. I didn't realize that then. We had very boring stories, say in the classroom, and we didn't take on the responsibility of finding things of interest. It was more difficult then. Nowadays, I can find whatever I want on the internet. So to some extent, I would take advantage of what's available today in terms of technology, MP3 files, more audio. In the old days, we didn't have the ready access to audio. So all of those things would be different than what I did back then. And in many cases, it's because it's become that much easier to do. So maybe we'll wrap it up here. And let me know if you found this interesting, and let's look forward to the next one. All right. I guess I just end the stream here. Okay. End stream. Bye for now.